Directed by Jackie Payne and Cara Claymore. Claymore having a small role in the movie. We are talking Werewolf Game. And this, of course, is based on the social interaction game Werewolf, also known as Mafia. You might know the TV show The Traitors, which is actually kind of based on the Werewolf Game concept. And I should point out, this is a movie with no actual werewolves in it. So if you are expecting a creature feature with werewolves on screen, this is not it. So what is this movie if you haven't heard of the Werewolf Game? It is kind of, as they say, if you've watched the TV show The Traitors, that is based on the Werewolf Game. It's a little bit like Squid Games, I would suppose. Maybe a touch of Battle Royale. It takes place on a kind of an island somewhere, and we have 12 strangers that have been abducted and are forced to play a game of deduction, ultimately. And these strangers are given a title. They're either a werewolf or a villager. There is 3 werewolves and 9 villagers, so 12 in total. And they have to figure out who are the werewolves, and the werewolves have to try and kill the villagers without being discovered themselves. And so effectively you have 2 groups of people that are sort of, you know, have paranoia, using their deduction skills, social interactions to try and deduce who is the werewolves and who are the villagers before they are killed. And they have to nominate people who they think are, you know, the werewolf to ultimately get the chop. Leading proceedings here, you have Tony Todd as the judge, named kind of one of our named actors here. But you've also got Robert Picardo and Bai Ling in smaller roles as well. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Only a matter of time, really, before there was a kind of official movie based on this, I suppose. It is quite an interesting concept. Obviously the game was, I believe, made in the 80s, so the actual concept of this game has been around for a while now. So it's strange really that it's taken this long, to be honest. And we have seen things like this introduced in kind of media before, as I say, probably most famously The Traitors. But it's a fun sort of concept, and there is some social actual kind of studies that have been based on this game, and kind of it is used as a sort of a psychological tool. So you know, it does have some actual kind of educational value to a degree in regard to the actual kind of game that it's based on. So there was an interesting idea here, and ultimately, this is kind of a horror thriller game with people kind of getting executed as they get nominated by their fellow kind of players. But it's more of a thriller rather than an out-and-out horror movie, I would suggest. It's not a particularly kind of gory movie or anything like that. There are a couple of kind of fun sequences where when our werewolves are out hunting of a night, we kind of see POV shots of them kind of like stalking through the woods and with this kind of like HUD display and stuff like that, which is kind of quite fun. And that has some horror imagery, and they're kind of dressed up as sort of in werewolf kind of costumes, but not actually werewolves. So there is a few horror elements here, but it's more of a kind of a thriller, that I would say. But it's an interesting idea, and the key to this one is to have characters and quite a lot of dialogue. So, and I do think this movie does try to be more of a dialogue-driven movie, with people, you know, throwing out accusations about who they believe. People obviously trying to kind of fool their players into thinking they are or they are not werewolves and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of character work here, and it's unusual for a lower budget movie to focus so much on the characters, but that's really the whole point of this one. So it really is a dialogue driven movie, with the majority of the scenes having these kind of players sit around talking, and there's much talking about trying to escape as well as trying to figure out who is who. And there's obviously people you know, being deceptive and things like that. So it's kind of a fun, sort of psychological, kind of horror movie, I guess you would say, horror thriller. That has some fairly good characterizations for a kind of a lower budget movie. Tony Todd is always excellent. He's behind a mask for most of it, but you can kind of obviously tell it's Tony Todd. But he's still quite charismatic. It's this kind of the judge, this kind of guy who's in charge of everything here. And then we have these kind of like mindless goons with masks on who seem to be, you know, the kind of the soldiers, so to speak, of this kind of this werewolf company. And there's some stuff that's kind of like explained about that, and so it has some interesting sort of concepts here in regards to bigger ideas, I would say. The acting, I've got to be honest with you, is a little bit of a mixed bag. And again, a movie that relies so much on character work, dialogue, and quite frankly, acting, is going to live or die on some of its acting. And it is a mixed bag, I won't lie. I do think there are some performances that are actually, you know, perfectly fine. And again, you've got to bear in mind this is a lower budget movie. And there is some kind of, as I say, there are some recognisable faces here. But yeah, the acting, there is, we'll come on to it again, but there are some performances who I did think did a better job than others. And I think the whole concept here is somewhat of a kind of a unique idea for a horror film. Let's talk about what doesn't work, and as I've kind of touched on, I do think the acting is mixed, and there are some performances that are on the weaker side, and some of them are just just plain hammy. They're just plain hammy acting. And why that's more important in this movie than, say, an actual werewolf movie, is that because this is so dependent on your characters. So I feel the poorer acting here, where we do see it, stands out more and is more, it affects the movie more than if it was just a straight creature feature, for example, where the main thrust of the film isn't sort of a dialogue-driven or character-based movie. So I think that, unfortunately, some of the poor acting maybe brings the movie down a little bit. There are some elements here where I sort of did question it. Now, again, I'm not going to spoil anything for you here, but our villagers, when they nominate who they think is a werewolf, that person is then executed by one of the guards. They never actually physically have to kill anyone, but our werewolves have to physically kill the villagers. And that is maybe where I have a problem with some of the concepts here, because they are not actually werewolves. They are just people in a costume. And, you know, there's so many variables. I mean, in the fact that when they attack someone, I mean, some of these these villagers are ready with weapons and stuff like that, and they could easily have defeated themselves. So it's not like a given that a werewolf attacking someone in this scenario is actually going to come out on top, because they're not actually a werewolf. They're just some person. And as such, I think the concept is a little lacking in that regards, because you know, there's no guarantees that this person dressed up as a werewolf is going to kill this other person who's designated a villager just because they are the werewolf, if that makes sense. So you know, it happens in this movie because that's what the movie wants us to do. But in a concept where you had people doing this, where two people are fighting, and it's not always going to plan out as you might think. There's too many variables involved here. So I think the concept, I mean, I think they should have actually been the werewolves, and then you could have said, well, they're clearly going to win. But in this instance, there's no guarantee of that. At least I didn't think, to be honest. It also is sometimes a little obvious about who isn't or isn't in a werewolf. And I have to say, some of the ideas here where people, you know, have been put here against their will and they're in the life or death situation, but their priority seems to be getting laid. You know, it seems an odd choice to me. And the movie is a lot of sitting around talking about how to escape, and we kind of go off a few kind of tangents about who's, you know, ultimately kind of pulling the strings and things like that. So I think the idea is an interesting one. I think the execution, it lacks budget. I mean, it's a very low budget movie. I think had they actually been werewolves, it could have been a bit more interesting. I think the concept is flawed in multiple ways because it isn't. And I just think the concept maybe isn't as interesting as it could have been. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What would your thoughts are? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.